They began to count the moons with his height. Each time the moon returned to its round face, Obioma's shadow on the courtyard wall grew longer, and the palace women marked the change with a soft joy that tasted like fear. He learned to walk before most boys did. He learned to run without falling. He learned to climb the fig tree near the royal storehouse and sit in the fork of its branches as still as a carved bird. When he laughed with his whole body. When he sat quiet, a hush fell around him as if the air remembered something. Queen Ifedi kept him close in the early years. She took him at dawn to the women's courtyard where the floor was always swept and the water pots shone. She let him touch the smooth clay and the cool calabashes. When he reached for the brass bracelets on her wrist, she let him hold them and listen to their tiny sound when they kissed. She whispered to him the names of rivers, trees, crops, and birds, as if the land might answer back with kindness once it felt the respect in his breath. Sometimes she pressed his little feet to the ground and prayed that the earth would forgive what it did not understand. The king visited him each morning before the stool of judgment. He would lift the boy high, higher than any servant dared to lift a prince, until Obioma squealed and patted his father's face with chubby hands. Those were the hours when the king forgot the wilted bean rolls and the sudden deaths of goats that came after the child's night cries. Those were the hours when he believed only in this small, warm weight and in the future that one day would sit firm on the stool. But when the boy's eyes, ember bright, steady, held his own for a heartbeat too long, a tremor touched the king's heart like a cold finger. It passed quickly, yet it always came again. To protect the land and the child, the palace made rules. They did not call them laws, only careful ways. The queen asked that Obioma's sleeping room be kept quiet with soft mats and thick curtains of cloth. A lamp burned low through the night, watched by an old woman with calm eyes and a patient back. If Obioma stirred and whimpered, the woman sang before the cry could gather itself. If tears reached his eyes, the queen came at once, and the old woman stepped back with a bow. No drum was to be beaten near the prince's chamber. No quarrel was to be allowed in his hearing. No harsh story was to be told to him, for fear sorrow would seize his heart and spill into the land. When the prince was carried through the courtyards, the servants stood still, their faces smoothed like river stones. They bowed low, but few dared to smile fully. Some tried and failed. A few kind ones did better, and Obioma always reached toward those. He knew, even as a little child, which hands were brave and soft, and he chose them without being taught. Still, as he grew and began to walk on his own, the palace started to feel like a river with hidden currents. He learned which corridors were safe, which corners he must not turn, which doors would close gently in his face before he could knock. At the new Yam festival, when children ran in bright cloth and men lifted heavy mortars in a show of strength, Obioma watched from a shaded veranda. His mother sat beside him, and a guard stood discreetly at the entrance to the veranda steps. The prince leaned forward, eyes wide with longing, as wrestlers grinned and circled in the dust. He wanted to stand in that dust, to clap his hands with the others, to be pulled into a dance by boys his size. But the guard's hand, always gentle, rested near the boy's shoulder like a quiet fence. The queen placed a small, roasted yam on a leaf for him, sprinkled with oil, and told him stories between mouthfuls. "The yam grows in darkness," she said, "but it comes to light in its time." He listened, and for a while, the story made the fence feel softer. The first clear sign of his loneliness showed itself one afternoon when a child from the servants' quarters, a lean boy with a scar on his chin, wandered into the courtyard where Obioma played with carved animals. The boy stopped short when he saw the prince's eyes, then, gathering courage, bent to admire the wooden leopard. "Fine," he said in a small voice. He did not reach for it. Obioma held it out to him. The boy hesitated, then took it, his face brightening. They sat together and rolled the wooden creatures across the mat. The queen walked in and paused, hope and fear tugging at her in the same breath. She said nothing. Let them play, she decided. Let joy try. They played for a long stretch of sun, but when the boy stood to go and stumbled on the mat, he knocked the wooden leopard against the prince's ankle. Not hard, not enough to bruise, yet surprise flashed through Obioma like a match struck in dry grass. He cried out, not a long cry, only one sharp note of hurt and fear. Far away in a palace garden, a fresh bean shoot curled and gave up its reach for the sun. The boy with the scar felt the air go strange without understanding why. He ran. He did not come back for many moons. The queen gathered Obioma and rocked him until the small storm inside him passed. That evening, she sent oils to the boy's mother and a string of beads for the boy. She also asked very softly that he be kept away a little longer. The king increased the circle of silence. He sent trusted men to watch the father farms and report any sudden withering, any sickness that came all at once like a hawk dropping on a chicken. He paid for losses quickly, so bitterness would not have time to grow teeth. He kept the praise singers quiet and the festivals small. He told himself, a kingdom rests on quiet feet. We will walk quietly until the ground learns our step again. Obioma was not ignorant. Even as a child, he felt the change in chambers when he entered, the way voices softened or stopped, the way shirts were smoothed and eyes dropped. He asked his mother one day, "Why do people walk like cats around me?" The queen looked at him a long time and answered, "Because you are a prince, and people do not wish to step on a prince's foot." He accepted it because he loved her voice and trusted her words. But later, alone, he held the answer up to the light in his mind and saw a thin crack running through it. He learned quickly. He learned the names of herbs from the old women who mixed them. He learned the stories that lived in the patterns of woven cloth. He learned to handle a small staff and to balance on a beam laid over the ground without falling. He learned to read faces and to hear the weight inside a man's silence. He asked few questions, but when he asked, they were deep ones. "If a stream turns black," he said once, "where does the blackness go when the stream turns clear again?" The chief priest smiled with a tight mouth and answered carefully, "It returns to the place it came from." The boy nodded, not satisfied, not dissatisfied, storing the answer away like a seed that might sprout later. In his 6th year, he watched a line of ants carry crumbs across a veranda and, for reasons he could not explain, felt a great sadness. He cupped one ant carefully and returned it to the line. For the rest of the day, nothing in the palace wilted. The queen, who had learned to count blessings by the day, lit a small lamp in thanks that night and sat long with it, whispering gratitude as if thanks itself could knit the land back together. The king's unease deepened as Obioma's body stretched taller and his eyes burned steadier. The ember glow did not fade as the elders had quietly hoped. In certain lights, the eyes looked ordinary. In shade, they gathered their fire and held it like a secret. The king began to take the boy to the royal training yard when the sun was gentle. There, with the master of youths, Obioma threw short spears at a straw target and learned to plant his feet like someone who belongs to the earth. He did well. He did not laugh when he did well. He only looked to see if his father had seen. When the spear missed, he did not cry. He breathed out slowly and tried again. The master of youths, a hard man with a soft center, nodded in approval and later told the king, "He has discipline." The king answered, "He must have something more than discipline." He did not say the name of what he needed because the name had started to taste like fear. There were days of clear welcome too. An old drummer with scarred hands, now retired, came sometimes to sit in the prince's shade and tell him stories of rhythms. He tapped them with his fingers on his knees so softly that no one would call it drumming. Every rhythm has a path. he said. Some led to war, some led to harvest, some led to sleep. A king must know which path his drum is beating. Obioma listened, and when the man paused, the prince repeated the rhythm back with small taps against the bench. The old drummer smiled with his whole face. "Your ears are good," he said. "Good ears are better than a loud voice." A woman from a far hamlet, known for carving tiny figures that carried the spirit of their subjects, came to make a toy for the prince. She studied his face a long time, her eyes kind and steady. She carved a small bird with a wide eye and a tail that seemed about to lift in flight. When she presented it, Obioma held it as if it were warm. "It looks like a bird that watches the road," he said. The woman bowed. That night, a banana plant in the far garden fell without wind. The king's men cut it down and burned it before anyone else could see. The carver left with gifts and a warning never to speak in the market of what she had seen in the prince's eyes. She promised. She kept her promise. The queen's hands never stopped moving in service. She fed the poor from the palace pots. She sent cloth to new mothers. She visited the sick with herbs that cooled fevers. She believed goodness must be poured into the land daily, like water or dry places would spread. She did not speak to anyone of the old shrine in the forest, but sometimes, when the prince slept, she took out the small gourd where she had once hidden the forbidden charm and looked at it a long time. It was empty now. Still, she looked as if the emptiness itself could give counsel. When Obioma was 8, a harmattan wind came early and refused to leave. It dried the skins of children and cracked the lips of men. The king sent oil to every compound and ordered wells covered to keep their throats from turning to dust. On a morning when the wind was a fine white veil across every doorway, the prince slipped from his room and walked toward the gate without his guardians. He wanted to feel the world beyond the palace wall. He wanted to see the road, the trees that leaned over it, the place where women balanced water on their heads and men carried hoes over their shoulders. A guard spotted him and hurried to meet him. "My prince," the man said, bowing low, "let me walk with you." The boy nodded, and they went together to the gate, but the gate did not open. Another guard, older and heavier, shook his head with respect. "The king's word," he said softly. The prince turned back without a word. When he reached his room, he sat on the floor and held the watching bird the carver had made. He did not cry. 2 leaves fell from the fig tree outside the window out of season. He did not fight the boundaries. He learned to find ways around them that did not break them. He asked the storytellers for tales of the road. He asked the stable master about the smell of the forest after rain. He asked the cook about the taste of yams from a far field where the soil was black and rich. He stored all these answers inside him, a small treasure house of other people's walks. From time to time, small kindness broke through fear like grass through a crack in stone. A girl who swept the passageway near his room smiled at him as if he were only a boy and not a prince at all. She showed him how to fold a leaf to make a tiny cup that could hold a sip of water. He copied her and laughed when his first leaf cup leaked. The queen saw them and said nothing. Later, the girl's mother found extra grain in their basket when she thought it was empty. The girl was careful after that, but she did not stop smiling when the prince passed. For several days, the palace garden grew without any sudden sorrow. The queen lit a lamp and gave thanks again. At night, when most children sink into deep and simple sleep, Obioma often lay awake, his eyes flickering in the lamp glow. He listened to the palace breathe, the soft call of the gate guard to his partner, the shuffle of a rat in the rafters, the sigh of mats being pulled over sleeping bodies. He learned the timing of the watch calls and the low thunder of distant drums when news traveled. he felt connected to these hidden movements, and they comforted him in ways his toys did not. Sometimes he rose and stood at the window, pressing his palms to the cool clay, and felt the night cool his blood. On such nights, the land was quiet too, as if it agreed to rest with him. But sorrow could rise without cause, like mist, and when it did, he could not always hold it. A time came when a servant told him a story of a dog that had lost its way and never found its house again. The story was meant to teach caution. Instead, it opened a small door inside him, and he wept slow tears for a creature he had never seen. His weeping was soft, a steady fall like dew. In the yam storehouse, a stack of tubers at the bottom of a pile went bad in a single night. The smell reached the king by morning. He ordered the bad ones carried away before anyone else could smell them. He told the servants, "Turn the pile in silence." Then he went to the prince and found him quiet and pale, his eyes like embers banked with ash. The king sat beside him and said nothing. After a long while, he said, "A king learns to carry sadness without letting it spill." The boy looked at him as if the words were a bowl handed to him before he was old enough to carry water. The elders came less often to see the prince. They loved him in their way, but they loved the land too, and the land was their first child. When they did come, they brought riddles and proverbs, trying to build him from the inside, since the outside world was kept far. "What does a drum say when no one is there to hear it?" one asked. Obioma thought, then answered, "It keeps the rhythm for the man who will come." The elders nodded. The answer pleased them and made them afraid. The chief priest taught him short prayers that were clean and old, prayers without bargaining. "A good prayer is like clear water," he said. "You do not need to stir it to make it pure." The boy repeated them morning and night, and the queen added her own silent words to each one, asking that the clear water would wash away anything dark that had followed him into the world. By his 12th year, he had the carriage of a prince and the eyes of someone who had walked far, though his feet had never left the palace ground. He began to sit behind the king during small judgments, listening as neighbors argued over a boundary or a goat that had eaten cassava leaves. He noticed that the king gave more than he took, that he asked questions before he spoke, and that the truth in a man's face was often louder than the words that left his mouth. He learned to see when a liar believed his own story and when a truthful man stammered because truth is heavy. After each session, he asked the king 1 or 2 questions, never more. The king answered when he could. When he could not, he said, "You will know when you sit where I sit." Obioma nodded and stored that answer too. He grew strong. He could run the length of the training yard without panting. He could climb the fig tree and hang by his knees like any boy would. He could hold a spear and keep his hand steady. He could also sit perfectly still for the time it took the shadow of the courtyard post to travel from one mark to another, thinking thoughts no one could name. The master of youth said in a tone that tried to be ordinary, "This one will make enemies think long before they step." He said it to the air when no one else was listening. As he grew, the circle around him did not shrink. If anything, it tightened. The king, seeing how the boy's feelings touched the land, ordered more guards at night, but told them to walk softly and sing no marching songs. He sent messengers to distant shrines that were not forbidden to ask for wisdom without cost. He received answers that spoke in wide circles and said little, like clouds that promise rain and give only shade. He did not stop asking. There were nights when Obioma dreamed of a forest he had never entered, where a fire burned without wood and a voice spoke from behind it. He woke before the words became sentences and could not tell what the voice had said. He did not tell the queen about these dreams. He did not know why he kept them, only that they felt like a string tied to something important. The queen, sensing changes she could not name, doubled her gifts to the poor and her silence in the palace. The king, sensing the same, sharpened his watch on the land and his gentleness with the boy. The villagers learned to live with two truths that would not blend. They loved their prince because he was theirs. They feared their prince because the land answered to his tears. They did what people do when love and fear sit at the same table. They spoke his name with careful lips. They praised his growth in short lines, and they went home early from the market when the sky looked strange. In their huts at night, mothers told their children, "Do not mock, do not speak carelessly. The wind carries words." Fathers added, "The prince is a river. Rivers can drown, and rivers can feed. Learn the river." By the end of that year, Obioma had made a peace with solitude that would have broken many. He walked the palace with a soft step and a straight back. He learned the names of the guards and greeted them. He sat with the old drummer when the man came, and they tapped quiet rhythms. He let the girl who swept the passageway teach him two more leaf-folded shapes, and he folded them in his room where no one watched. He did not ask for the gate to open. He did not ask for the boys to come and wrestle in his yard. He kept his heart in a soft cloth and unwrapped it only for his mother and sometimes for his father when the king's face was free of the day's weight. Yet even wrapped hearts beat. In the hush before dawn, when the world chooses whether to return to noise or remain in silence, Obioma sometimes felt a stirring that was not hunger and not fear. It moved through him like a wind that has traveled a long way and knows news. He would sit up, eyes bright in the lamplight, and listen as if something had entered the room that did not walk on feet. He did not know its name. He did not try to catch it. He simply listened, and when it went, he lay back and watched the little tongue of flame dance and rest, dance and rest. So he entered his next season, taller, steadier, wise beyond his years, and more alone than a prince should be. The palace held its careful lines around him. The kingdom breathed with him and sometimes flinched for him. The queen loved him with a depth that shone through her quiet, and her hands still shook when his mouth began to tremble. The king guarded him and the land with equal strength and equal fear. And Obioma, who had learned to read the world from inside its walls, waited without knowing he was waiting, for a door in his life to open by itself, for a voice to step fully out of the shadow, for the time when the drumbeat inside him would finally tell him which path it meant to lead him down. They began to count his years, not by moons alone, but by the way his step sounded on the stone. The boy had become a young man, and the young man carried himself like a staff planted straight on the earth. His shoulders broadened, his hands grew sure, and the training yard no longer seemed too large for him. When he threw the spear, it went clean to the heart of the straw target. When he held the short sword, his grip was steady, not proud. Those who watched shook their heads gently and said to themselves, "He is ready to sit behind the king at judgment, and soon he will be ready to sit where the king sits." They did not say this loudly because in Ezenagu words carried long, and the wind loved to carry news that was not ready. Queen Ifedi watched her son with the tenderness of dawn light. She saw that his mouth had learned to rest without sadness and to smile without careless joy. She saw that his eyes still held their ember glow, though now it was deeper, calmer, as if the fire had learned the language of patience. She walked behind his days with careful prayers, tying her words like small charms to the branches of his life where no one else could see them. Sometimes when he sat in the open yard at evening, she stood in the doorway and simply counted his breaths, remembering the time when each breath had frightened the land. King Agumba had taught him the small judgments, boundary stones moved by half a hand, goats that strayed through gaps, loans that turned to quarrels when the harvest was late. Obioma listened, asked 2 or 3 precise questions, and spoke a conclusion that sent both men home with equal dignity. The elders nodded at each other and said, "His mind is a clean calabash." The king heard this and allowed himself for a short while to believe that the kingdom would finish its fearful season and enter a long peace under this sun. Then the dreams began to change. Obioma had always dreamed, as all men do, but his dreams had been stray goats wandering through new grass, small, ordinary things that left no trace by morning. Now his sleep carried a different weight. In the first dream, he stood by the river bend that women loved, and the water was clear as good glass. Fish moved like silver thoughts under the surface. Then a soft cry, not loud, like the beginning of rain in distant leaves, rose behind him, and the river darkened at its center, the way oil blooms across water. He turned to see who had cried, but there was no one there. When he woke, his mouth was dry, as if he had been speaking all night, though he had said nothing. On another night, he dreamed of the fig tree near the royal storehouse. It had been his friend since boyhood, the tree that bent a low branch for him to climb. In the dream, the tree shone with a green so rich it looked like fresh praise. Then a wind passed that did not move his hair, and the leaves turned their faces down. He heard again that small cry that was not a cry, the beginning of grief, and one branch loosened its grip on the trunk and fell without sound. He woke with his hands fisted against his chest and felt shame because he had pressed his palms so hard that crescent marks stood in his skin. He did not speak of these dreams. He carried them as a man carries a hot stone he is ashamed to drop. During the day, his eyes began to gather more than light. He would look at a guard and know, without proof, that the man had argued quietly with his wife before coming on duty. He would look at a pot of soup and understand that one leaf too many had made the taste tired. He would look at a smiling man and feel like a pebble in his sandal, the small, unspoken envy tucked in the corner of the smile. None of these things made him proud. They only made him quiet. He began to understand that seeing is heavier when it looks behind faces. The chief priest noticed the change and grew cautious in his lessons. He taught Obioma shorter prayers even than before, words as simple as water, gratitude for breath, blessing for the land, mercy for the unknown. When a man begins to hear what others cannot hear, he must speak less, the priest said softly. Silence can protect a house. Obioma bowed and kept the advice. But the river inside him did not stop talking. There were times too when waking felt like a dream. He would pass the carved door that held the story of Ezenagu, the leopard, the warrior, the woman who lifted a calabash higher than any man, and the figures would seem to breathe. The leopard's eye would flicker, and the warrior's heel would lift a grain of dust no one else could see. He would look again and find nothing changed, but the feeling remained that he had crossed a thin line between seen and unseen. One afternoon, as the sun laid a gold mat across the palace floor, a hawk circled high, keeping its own counsel. Obioma felt a tug in the back of his mind, the way a fisherman feels a first, faint pull on the net before it moves. He went to the shaded veranda and sat still. The hawk narrowed its circles and then, with the smoothness of a thought becoming a word, fell. He heard the whisper of air, then the sudden absence of sound as the bird rose again with a snake in its claws. It should have been an ordinary sight, a story of the strong and the quick. But the pull in his mind tightened, and a sentence that was not his formed fully. Everything in the open pays for everything in secret. He shivered, though the heat was gentle. He did not know whose voice had spoken in him. That night, he slept and entered a room he had never seen and knew at once. It was a half circle of dark walls polished with the shine of old smoke. Masks with mouths like buried thunder watched from the shadows. A low fire burned in one corner, although no wood fed it. At the center stood a woman, neither tall nor short, wrapped in cloth like night and morning dyed together. Her eyes were old. Her voice had the kind of weight that makes a man set his feet before he hears it. "You have come," she said, though he had not moved. "Or rather, the time has come to meet you." "Who are you?" he asked, and the words did not echo. The room ate them and gave them back changed. "I am the keeper of the shrine your mother sought when the high gods were slow," she said. "I am the mouth that spoke when she would not listen to silence." His heart struck once, like a drum when a careless boy tests it. He did not step back. "I do not know you," he said, but it was not true. He knew her the way a river knows the shape of its bed. She lifted her chin. "You know me the way a seed knows the dark that covers it. Listen and carry what I say without adding anything to it, the way a servant carries a pot on a straight head. Your life was woven where mortals should not weave. Your mother, Queen Ifedi, came to my quiet, forbidden door. She asked for a son. She asked with a heart split by love and fear. I told her the price. She took it. You were not born of blessing alone. You were born of a bargain." Obioma stood still because there was nothing else to do. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He found it and said, "What price?" "The peace of the land," she answered, as simply as a woman answering a market price. "Every tear from your eye would be a rope pulled tight around some part of Ezenagu. Your cry would lay a tax on goats, on crops, on water. The kingdom would pay what your life demanded. You have seen it, though they wrapped it in quiet and hid it under gifts." His chest swelled and emptied, swelled and emptied. He could not say whether he was breathing too fast or too slow. He wanted to speak his mother's name and swallow it at the same time. "Why?" he asked, and the word cracked a little. She looked at him with a softness that made the room seem older and kinder. "Because love is brave and foolish at the same time," she said. "Because a woman feared the end of her husband's line more than she feared the end of her own peace. Because the throne you sit near was bought twice, once with your father's victories and once with your mother's sorrow. The stool has legs you can see and one you cannot see. You are that leg." He shut his eyes and opened them. When he shut them, the room remained. When he opened them, the room moved closer. "If my tears pull at the land," he said, voice low, "why did the gods allow me to live?" "The gods are not merchants who refuse a coin just because they do not like whose hand holds it," she answered. "A bargain is a road. Once a traveler enters, the road accepts his feet. You were promised and you came. Life itself does not stop just because the door it uses is wrong." He swallowed, and the swallow hurt. "Am I only a curse?" he asked, and for the first time, his voice carried more than weight. It carried a plea. The shrine keeper's eyes did not turn away. "No," she said. "A curse does not love. You love. A curse does not learn. You learn. A curse does not choose. You will choose. Remember that. But do not hide from the other truth. Your breath and the kingdom's breath are tied. When your sorrow rises, the land bows. When your joy is held carefully, the land rests. This has been the thread running under every day of your life." He thought of the withered palms from his first cry, the dark river like a wounded eye, the beans that fell sick, the yam pile that turned while he wept for a lost dog in a story. He felt the shape of those days pulled together like string drawn tight. He knew then that he had always known something like this, just not with words. "My mother," he said softly. Did she know the shape of what she bought? "She knew enough to tremble and agree," the keeper said. "Do not hate her. Hate is a fire that burns the pot that carries it. She carried grief to buy you. She has carried fear to raise you. She will carry whatever comes after because her love is a calabash without a bottom." The fire in the corner lifted a little and fell, though no wood fed it. Obioma lifted his eyes to the masks along the wall. In their still mouths, he saw storms and harvests, births and burials, feasts and famines. He saw himself as a small boy holding a carved bird. He saw the king's hand tremble on a spear for the first time. He saw his mother sitting upright at night, her eyes two wounded stars. "What am I to do with this truth?" he asked. "Carry it," she said. and let it make you straight. A man who walks with truth in his head will plant his feet carefully. A man who refuses truth stumbles even on smooth ground. There will be more to hear when your ears are ready. For now, take this. You are born of bargain. Your tears draw life from Ezenagu. The stool under your father is held up by your shadow. Watch your heart, guard your breath, love your people without lying to yourself. Will there be a day when the rope breaks? He asked, and the question frightened him as soon as it left his mouth. She did not answer at once. The fire sighed. Somewhere beyond the walls, a slow drum counted a distance he could not measure. Every rope has a breaking, she said at last, but not every breaking is made by hands. Some are made by sacrifice, some by fire, some by a mouth that says yes when the body wants to say no. The road will ask you its question. When it does, your answer will not be light. A chill moved through him, although nothing in the room had changed. He felt the weight of a thing not yet said, as if the dream stood on the bank of a river whose far shore he could not see. He steadied himself the way his father had taught him in the training yard. Feet apart, breath even, eyes soft and clear. When will you speak again? He asked. When you call from the place where fear and duty meet, she said, or when the land calls louder than both of us. Wake, child of bargain. Wake, child of love. He woke with the taste of ash and sweetness on his tongue together. The lamp in his room had burned low, and the old woman who watched it slept with her head on her folded arms. He rose and crossed the floor without sound. The night in the palace held its ordinary threads. The guard's soft call, the brush of leaves against the wall, a rat's tiny feet stitching across a beam. Yet everything inside those threads had shifted. He stood by the window and lifted the curtain with 2 fingers. The sky was very clear. The stars looked close and far at once. He wanted to cry, but he did not. He wanted to scream, but he did not. He breathed and let the pain travel through him, the way water moves through woven reed, slowly, without breaking the weave. He thought, for the first time in his life with all his strength, that his life was not his alone. He had known this in small ways. Now he knew it with the size of a river in flood. In the morning, he went to the training yard and asked the master of youths for a task that would pull at his muscles and leave no room for thought. The man, who had seen many eyes but never eyes like these, gave him heavy work, lifting stones from one side of the yard to the other and back again. Obioma worked until the son's hand pressed his shoulders and his breath roared in his ears. Sweat ran freely. His hands found their old strength. Not one plant in the garden wilted that day. The queen, watching from a shaded doorway, pressed her lips together to stop a prayer from breaking into sobs. She did not know why the day was kinder. She placed a palm on the warm clay of the wall and whispered thanks anyway. At judgment, he sat a half step behind King Agumba and watched mouths speak, eyes deny and confess, hands tell truths by the way they held nothing. He felt inside himself a new patience, a deep pool where quick anger might have leaped before. When a man lied, Obioma did not mark him as an enemy. He considered the fear that had shaped the lie. When a woman told the truth through tears, he honored the cost, knowing what tears could buy without asking. The king noticed a new stillness in his son and did not know whether to be proud or to fear it. He chose pride because a father chooses the mat that is softer. By evening, news had moved quietly through the palace. The prince had worked like 3 men in the heat. The gardens were untroubled. The animals had fed and lay calm. The river at the women's bend had kept its clear face. The servants did not dare to say the word relief, but they wore it like cool water on their foreheads. Queen Ifedi fed the poor until the pots were empty and sent more from her own room. The chief priest burned leaves in the temple and said words that did not ask for anything, only gave thanks. King Agumba walked the courtyard alone at dusk and touched the fig tree lightly, as if to confirm with his palm what his eyes believed. Obioma sat in his chamber and thought of the shrine keeper's face. He did not hate his mother. He could not. He did not hate the land either, though he had reason to. He felt caught between two loves, and both were heavy. He looked at his hands and wondered what use they would be if all that mattered was inside him, not in his fingers or his arms. Then he stood and did the only simple thing he could do. He poured a small bowl of clean water, set it on the floor, and bowed his head over it. He spoke softly, not to bargain, but to declare, as the chief priest had taught him, breath for the land, peace for the fields, mercy for my mother, strength for my father, wisdom for my feet. The words settled like calm birds on a branch. He drank, and the water tasted like something that had waited a long time to be tasted. That night, sleep did not come quickly. When it did, it came with no dreams, only a deep dark like the inside of the richest soil. In the middle of the night, he woke and felt that someone had entered. He sat up, heart steady. It was not the shrine keeper. It was not a guard. It was only the clear knowledge that the next step of his life would not wait. He would have to ask his parents for the story behind his birth and receive it like a man, not like a child with a bowl begging for sweet soup. At dawn, the first light found him already dressed, already steady. The old woman by the lamp woke and started to rise, but he gestured for her to rest. He stepped into the corridor. The palace was not fully awake. He could hear the cooks pulling back the lids of pots, the guards changing their watch, the sweepers setting their brooms to the ground. He went to the small courtyard where his mother often sat to greet the morning. She was there, as he knew she would be, her hands folded, her face turned to the light. "Mother," he said. She turned. Her love reached him before her eyes did. "My son," she answered, standing. "I need to know how I came into this world," he said. And though his voice was gentle, it carried the iron of decision. "I need to know all of it. Not the story for children, the true one." For a heartbeat, her face became the face of a woman in the forest at night, alone with a fire that spoke. Then she gathered herself and nodded. "Then you will know," she said, because love that once walked a forbidden road had learned it could not walk back the way it came. She sent for the king, and while the messenger went, mother and son stood in a silence that was neither enemy nor friend. It was only the door between what had been and what would be. The palace breathed around them. Somewhere a drummer tested the skin with the lightest tap. Somewhere a goat stamped and settled. Somewhere water broke into laughter in a pot lifted from the well. The young man with ember eyes waited, and the queen with a heart like a torn cloth held in both hands waited. And the king, coming down the corridor with steady steps, did not yet know that by sunset the shape of his house would change. The truth had walked out of the shadow. It would not return to it. The king came to the small courtyard with a measured step, but his eyes searched his son's face for a sign he could prepare his heart for. He saw no anger there, only a firm quiet. The queen stood between them for a breath, like a palm tree in strong wind, and then stepped aside so the truth could walk where it needed to. "My father," Obioma said, bowing slightly, "I ask for the full story of how I came into the world. I ask not as a child who wants comfort, but as a man who wants truth." King Agumba looked from his son to his wife. He knew many roads, war roads, judging roads, festival roads. This road was not any of those. "What has set your feet on this path?" he asked. "A dream that was not a dream," Obioma answered. "A voice that knows me better than my own breath. And signs I have carried in my chest since I was small. I can no longer live with half words." The king's jaw set. "Half words protect a house," he said. "Half words also break a house," Obioma replied, and the gentleness in his tone made the words heavier, not lighter. Queen Ifedi lifted her hands and lowered them again. Her face was so open that the morning light seemed to settle on it with care. "Let it be spoken," she said. "If we keep quiet, the quiet will turn against us." They went into an inner room where the walls held the memories of old counsel. A pot of water stood by the door. The queen poured for the king and for her son, then for herself, and they all drank, because truth should not be spoken with a dry throat. They sat on low stools. No servant remained. Even the lamp seemed to pull back its small flame, as if to listen better. "I will begin," Queen Ifedi said. "Then your father may add the parts that belong to him." King Agumba said nothing, but his hands that had never shaken in battle, touched and retouched the edge of his stool. The queen told it plain. She did not dress it with excuses. She spoke of the years when her womb was silent and the kingdom's whispers grew loud. She told of the old priest's clean prayers, the gifts at the temple, the patience that grew thin like worn cloth. She told of a night when her love for her husband and her fear for the throne joined hands and led her feet into the forest. She told of the forbidden shrine, the smoke-polished walls, the woman whose voice struck the air like thunder. She told of the bargain. She spoke the price in words that did not tremble. "I was told," she said steady, "that my son would come and he would be strong. I was told the land would pay, not once, but with each cry, each tear, each sorrow that touched him. I agreed. I agreed because my love was bigger than my fear, and yet my fear drove my love like a whip. I agreed because I could not bear to see the stool look for another head. I agreed because I was not wise." Silence fell like a heavy cloth. The king rose, paced once, twice, then turned with a face that carried storm and pain together. "You walked to a door our fathers warned us never to open," he said. "You bought a child with the peace of those who trusted our house." She did not lower her eyes. "I did," she said, "and I have carried its weight each day since." Obioma's breath came slow. He had thought his heart would run wild when the words formed. Instead, it settled deeper, as if at last it stood on ground it could name. He looked at the king. "Father," he said, "did you know?" The king's face changed, not with guilt, but with a blow he had not expected to take. "No," he said, "I did not know. I asked the high gods. I waited. I held the kingdom together by the edges so it would not tear while we waited. I watched you, and I saw the signs, and I built a wall of quiet to protect this house and the land. But I did not know this." He turned to Queen Ifedi, and there was more than anger in him. There was a loneliness that had never before entered his marriage. "You did not trust me with your fear," she swallowed. "I did not trust myself to tell you," she said. "I feared you would forbid me, and my heart would still run to the forest on its own. I feared that if you forbade me, and I obeyed, I would watch you grow old with an empty stool and break from the inside." The king's hands opened and closed. He was not a man used to being without the right word. "We could have borne the emptiness together," he said. "We could have taught the people to stand. We could have built a path for the stool that did not cost the land its breath." "We could have," she agreed, and her voice was the gentlest it had ever been. "But I chose another road, and we are on it." Obioma stood. He moved to the water pot and poured again, not because he was thirsty, but because the simple act steadied the room. He drank and felt the cool run through him like a clear thought. "The keeper of that shrine has spoken to me," he said. "She says I was born of bargain. She says my tears pull life from Ezenagu. I have seen it. I will not pretend I have not. I do not hate you, mother, but I will not wear a blindfold." The king's gaze softened when his eyes rested on his son. "I have watched you carry weight you did not put on your shoulders," he said. "I have watched you grow straight under it." He breathed out, and the sound was like a man setting down a spear at last. "Now we must decide how to carry this truth without letting it crush the house." He walked to the door and called for the chief priest and the 3 oldest elders who had served his father. When they came, he told them the story as a king must. without hiding, without letting the telling become a wound that bleeds the teller dry. The elders sat with shock laid across their faces like white cloth on a corpse. The chief priest closed his eyes for a long moment and then opened them with care. This explains what our eyes have seen and our mouths could not name, the oldest elder said. It explains the wilted gardens, the darkened water, the animals that fell in calm weather. It explains the fear that has set up its stool in the market. It does more than explain, the chief priest said. It sets a challenge that is not only of men. When a bargain is made on the wrong ground, it plants a tree no axe can easily fell. The queen straightened. Is there no path to lift this weight? She asked. Is there no clean sacrifice that can loosen the rope? The priest rubbed his thumb over the rim of his stool, thinking. Clean sacrifices speak to clean covenants, he said. This covenant was made in a house where we were told not to enter. The gods hear, but the voice that answered your step that night was not one that receives the same gifts as the high altars. Then what is left? King Agumba asked. The question sounded like iron. Truth is left, the priest answered, and the watchfulness that truth demands. The land is tied to the prince's tears. His heart must be guarded like a fire that should warm but not burn. We must keep peace around him. We must teach him to carry his sorrow without letting it spill. He paused. And we must ask whether the shrine keeper will speak again, not in dreams only, but to those who can witness. Asking for more from that mouth may invite a worse answer, one elder said. Not asking leaves us in a night without a moon, another replied. As they debated, a wind, though all windows were shut, stirred the pale smoke of the small lamp and drew a clean line in the air. The room cooled as if a cloud had stepped across the sun. Obioma lifted his head first. He knew this presence. He did not flinch. The lamp flame leaned, then stood again. A woman's shape gathered in the corner, not made of body, but not thin, like mist. It was the shrine keeper. Her eyes carried distance and closeness together. You summon without summoning, she said, her tone even. But the river has reached a bend. It is time for the next stone. The elders gripped their knees. The chief priest stood but did not flee. King Agumba stepped forward, the protector in him rising. You entered my house by my wife's fear, he said. Do not enter now with riddles. Speak and let us measure your words. The measure is larger than your arm, she answered. But I will speak in small lines. The rope that ties the prince's breath to the land has a knot no hand can loosen. It can only be cut, and the blade that cuts it is not iron. It is willing sacrifice. The queen let out a sound like a bird struck by a stone, small and terrible. No, she said, though no one had told her the rest. The shrine keeper's gaze did not soften or harden. If the prince lives beyond his 18th year, the bargain will ripen to full harvest. The land will burn. Fire will walk from hill to hill. Rivers will carry smoke instead of water. The breath of Ezenagu will thin until it cannot be gathered. This is the fruit of the seed you planted. The room held its breath. Even the lamp seemed to shrink. And if he gives himself willingly, the keeper continued, the fire will be starved, the rope will snap, the land will find its old path, the people will live, the stool will remain, but it will carry the mark of a price paid. That mark will teach your sons and your sons' sons to fear the wrong doors. King Agumba's chest rose and fell like a man who had just fought 3 men and was ready to fight 3 more. You ask me to accept my son's death, he said, voice low and steady, the kind of steady that meant danger. You ask me to stand while the land takes him. I do not ask, she said. I tell you what the road demands. The queen pressed both hands to her heart. Take me, she whispered, though she knew the road would not change its nature. Take me instead. The rope is tied to him, the keeper said. Another body cannot wear it. Obioma sat very straight. He did not look at anyone. He looked only at the empty air in front of him. He felt each word like a drum beat, and he let the beats line up until they made a rhythm he could understand. When he spoke, his voice was clear. "If I give my life," he asked, "the land lives?" "Yes." "And if I do not?" His mouth tightened as if it tasted smoke. "The land dies," she said. "Not at once, but sure. And those who live will wish they had not." "How is the time measured?" the chief priest asked, fighting for something he could hold. "You say the 18th year. Before his next birth moon returns full after his 18th counting," the keeper said. "The eclipse that comes soon is the drum that calls the last dance." A chill ran through the room. The elders looked at each other with eyes that suddenly remembered every story of dark suns and turned skies. The king clenched his hands until the veins stood. "Leave my house," he said, not with rage but with a king's right. "We have heard enough of your mouth." The shrine keeper inclined her head. "I leave," she said, "but the truth does not." She looked at Obioma last. "Child of bargain, child of love, the road will come to your feet. I cannot tell you what your mouth must say. I can tell you only that the land's breath is tied to yours. Choose with eyes open." She was gone, the air warmed by a finger's width. The lamp flame returned to its small, ordinary dance. For a moment, no one moved. Then everything moved. The king turned to the priest. "We will call a fast for the whole palace," he said. "We will quiet the drums. We will hold council each dawn and each dusk. Not a word of this will run in the streets. If anything leaks, I will know whose pot was cracked." The priest bowed. "I will write the prayers," he said, with no bargaining in them, only truth and strength. The elders rose, knees stiff, and spoke one by one. "We stand with the stool," the first said. "We stand with the land," the second added. "We stand with the prince," the third finished. And in those 3 lines, the whole struggle of Ezenagu stood. Outside the room, the palace breathed in and out, unaware of the words that had tried to change its ribs. But news has a way of finding cracks. By evening, a shadow of the truth had slipped under doors and through eaves. Not the whole truth, only the taste. People said, "Something has risen in the palace." Another said, "The prince walks under a heavier sky." Market talk lost its fat laughter and became thin. Mothers drew their children closer when they passed the palace wall. Men, sitting in the cool, watched the western hills with long eyes. That night, the queen sat beside her son and held his hands. She had not wept when the shrine keeper spoke. She had not wept when her husband set the palace to fasting. Now the tears came, not wild, but steady. "I walked a road," she said, "and my feet carried all of us. Forgive me." He drew her hands to his brow. "Mother," he said, "you gave me life and your fear. I carry both. I forgive you." He meant it. The forgiveness did not lighten the room, but it laid a mat they could sit on together. The king stood in the doorway and watched them. He had never felt war like this. In war, the enemy stood on the other side of a line. Here, the enemy was a rope made of love and mistake, tied to the heart of his own child. He went to the royal temple without escort and knelt. He did not bring gifts. He brought only his whole tired voice. "Ancestors who sat where I sit," he said, "look down this road with me. If there is a hole I cannot see, show it. If there is a bridge I have not built, teach my hands. If I must stand and lose what I love to save what I rule, put iron in my spine. But if there is a way to hold both, put light in my eyes to see it." Days shifted their weight. The palace fasted in cycles. Work did not stop, but it moved like a man walking on a narrow ridge. The training yard went quiet. The praise singers rapped their drums and set them aside. The cooks learned new gentleness with pots so lids would not fall and startle the prince at night. Servants spoke in low voices. The old drummer came, sat near Obioma, and tapped a rhythm with 2 fingers that meant courage without noise. Obioma listened and nodded. Some in the palace began to gather like birds on different roofs. There were those whose love for the prince made them dream of hiding him in some far hut under another name, as if distance could untie a rope that was knotted in the air. There were those whose fear for their children's bellies made them wish, in shame, that the shrine keeper's road would be taken quickly so the land would be spared. Most were in the middle, where love and fear take turns holding the same cup. The elders visited huts at night in pairs, speaking calm to those who had heard too much. Trust the stool, they said. Trust the king. They arranged extra yam for households whose plants had suffered and told men to keep their hoes in hand and not let talk sharpen them into spears. They told women to sing old songs while they cooked, because old songs make a house stand when new storms test it. Obioma did not hide. He walked the palace as he always had, straight and quiet. He judged 2 small cases with his father and answered well. He trained, but only with staff work that kept his breath deep and even. When he passed the fig tree, he touched it and listened for its answer. It stood healthy. He thanked it in his heart as if it were a man who had stayed loyal.